Obrigada por se encontrar com a gente.
Ah, minha voz vai distorcer.
A gente faz com que ninguém vai conhecer quem você é.
Tá.
Parte do que a gente está tentando fazer é encontrar e falar, conhecer algum desses madeireiros ilegais.
Lógico, Luiz. Não, a máfia envolve muita gente. E muita gente com poder.
Da corrupção?
Muito.
Qualquer dessas cidades que a gente vai visitar mais para dentro da Amazônia, mal a gente chega, eles vão saber que a gente está lá, né?
Sim. Rua sendo perigoso.
O que acontece às pessoas que estão tentando parar esse?
Aqui morre. Aqui morre.
The Amazon rainforest is at a tipping point. So all the little red dots, this is all...
More recent deforestation.
And criminal networks are pushing it closer to the edge. To understand how they operate, I'll travel to a violent frontier.
Nós encontrou 2 covas. Tá vendo você morto.
What's fueling the multi-billion-dollar trade for illegal timber? How's a global gold rush wreaking havoc on the jungle? He says it could end up in a gold ring just like mine. And what are the stakes for our planet?
I think it makes sense to think about the Amazon as a canary in the coal mine.
Watch out.
If we can't save it, we're doomed.
De sangue forte, Belém do Pará e o Marajó. Vim lá do norte trazer nosso carimbó. Então põe a mão na cintura.
500 miles from the mouth of the Amazon lies Itaituba, where a gold rush feeling hangs in the air. So as soon as you get here, you get a sense that this whole town is geared towards exploiting the Amazon. You can see it everywhere. There's gold shops, there's places selling chainsaws, and even the local mayor is a former gold miner. While it might not surprise you that illegal logging is a major factor in deforestation, gold mining is equally malicious. I've come to this region where nearly 30 tons of gold are extracted illegally every year as the first step on my mission to understand how criminal networks are decimating the Amazon. Okay, we're here. But how do I actually make my way into the Amazon's underworld? Through a contact, I've set up a meeting with a driver who works for local prospectors. Obrigada por se encontrar aqui com a gente. Então me fala pouco assim como é que é a economia dessa região.
A economia de Itaituba depende do garimpo e da madeira.
Legal e ilegal, como é que é?
Poucos legal, mais é ilegal.
Seria fácil pra gente encontrar garimpo que a gente pode filmar, garimpeiros, tudo isso?
Ilegal?
É.
Muito difícil. Eles não vão querer que filme.
Clearly, this is not the answer I'm looking for. But what I've learned from these situations is to never take the first no as the final answer.
Brilho.
And to keep buying drinks.
Para que a nossa mulher nunca fique viúva e nunca desculpe nossas namoradas.
Acordei e peguei no sono. Vesti a fantasia e virei bobo. Quantas versões se tem?
After a few rounds, the driver's tune has changed.
Tem garimpo que vem dentro da mata, né?
He now says he might be able to get me into a mine he knows, deep in the Amazon jungle.
É.
But there's a catch.
Então eu acho pouco complicado.
Porque é bem dentro da floresta.
É isso. Não usa carro, não usa barco. Nada, só avião.
Então o único modo de chegar nesse garimpo é só de avião.
Só avião.
Perigoso mesmo chegar de avião, né?
É, tem umas pistas que são perigosas. São muito curtas.
E tudo isso, a pista, imagino, também legal, né?
É, não é homologada. As pistas não são homologadas.
And so, thanks to my new drinking buddy, the next morning I find myself on one of the Amazon's infamous small planes. Já teve problemas com o avião?
Muitos amigos nossos aqui já foram embora, morreram, caíram de avião.
É mesmo?
Já caí de avião. Pode ficar tranquila. quem tá indicando é eu, né?
Que já caiu de avião.
É, que já caiu, tem experiência.
Looking out the window, while trying not to think about going down in a ball of flames, I'm struck by the immensity of the Amazon. But in 2020, an area the size of 345 Manhattans was wiped out. And in Brazil, up to 94% of that deforestation can be considered illegal.
So all these brown dots that you see, all these clearings in the jungle, that's all the illegal gold mines.
So who are the criminals responsible for this destruction? And why is gold mining so devastating to the rainforest? I'm hoping to find out.
This is what it's like to land on a runway made out of dirt.
I can't tell you where I'm headed. It's an agreement I made last night with the driver.
So that's our guys waiting for us over there. They're our contacts who are taking us to the mine.
Okay, guys, seriously, cameras down.
This is the area they asked not to film as we arrived.
But I can tell you this. It's always a little nerve-wracking getting in a car with a masked man. Someone I don't know if I can trust.
Você vai mudar essa voz, né?
A voz também vai ser mudada, prometo.
Esse garimpo aqui é ilegal,
Não é legal ainda,
porque senão você não estaria usando máscara.
com certeza.
The masked man, who I'll be calling Alain, says he's taking me to one of his 4 gold mines deep in the rainforest.
Nós já estamos perto já de chegar.
Alain tells me that other illegal prospectors in the area know I'm here, and we need to be on guard.
Porque com medo de represálias,
They almost prevented us from even landing. And so he's saying that people are just super scared here.
In Brazil, illegal gold mining is estimated to bring in more than $1 billion a year. While gold trafficking is less widespread than logging, it can leave permanent scars. Loggers often harvest valuable trees and leave the rest. Miners, however, slash everything in their path.
Wow. Surrounded by the jungle here. It's just a big clearing right in the middle of the rainforest.
This is pretty big, much bigger than I expected.
At the belly of a man-made crater, miners toil away in the mud, stripping back layer after layer of earth.
2 máquinas, 2 motores. Ele corta essa matéria aí todinha de cima, onde fica o cascalho, e a tubulação joga para a caixa, para concentrar o ouro.
It's a back-breaking, dirty job. Gold mines are a breeding ground for malaria, and the pace is furious.
It's crazy to think that all of this has been done in just 1 week. They just started working in this area a week ago, and you can see how much of it is already cleared out.
Deforestation from illegal gold mining has increased by more than 90% in recent years, and our insatiable thirst for the precious metal threatens to make the situation even worse. Tech companies consume hundreds of tons of gold a year. Pure gold is used in every smartphone.
Where are the products that are being produced in the Amazon going? They're coming here to the US, they're going to Europe. These massive corporations could decide to really trace the supply chains, but they're choosing not to.
The murky supply chain ensures that dirty gold finds its way into the market, much as blood diamonds do. And in Brazil, dirty gold has added significance.
Oh, it's mercury that they were putting in. Mas não tem perigo fazer isso, não?
Não, perigo nenhum.
So he just has this mercury, and the gold sort of combines with the mercury, and that's how they look and find gold here.
Despite what Alain says, mercury leaves rivers poisoned. The pollution can spread hundreds of miles downstream.
You see these little specks? The yellow specks are the gold, and these little sort of silver balls, that's the gold covered in mercury.
Alain then takes the unrefined gold to a dealer, one who doesn't ask too many questions.
E você acha que esse ouro vai acabar no Brasil ou vai sair do Brasil para outro
Não
país?
sei para onde ele vai.
Pode acabar assim numa
Uma aliança,
a gold ring just like mine. Em qualquer parte do mundo, né?
com certeza, isso qualquer pessoa.
O que você fala para os críticos, para as pessoas que falam que vocês estão destruindo a Amazônia, cortando árvore, poluindo?
Todo mundo critica, se preocupa com assim, a Amazônia. Eu acho que eles teriam que pensar primeiro no país deles. Então, eu só tenho a dizer uma coisa, que eles deixem a gente trabalhar.
But if miners like Alain are simply left to their own devices, the Amazon will continue to face a dark future. And in many cases, they actually have very little to show for it.
Sometimes they only get 70 to 80 grams of gold out of an area like this, so all this work was almost for nothing.
That amount means only a few $1,000s for a week of work for Alain and his 24 workers.
Então é um pouco como jogar na lotaria. E jogar na lotaria da Amazônia.
Arriscar, querendo o prêmio melhor.
Traffickers in the Amazon are playing a high-stakes game. And more times than not, they're losing.
É uma falácia, uma mentira. Sabe, dizer, tá gerando renda.
Os que estão fazendo o desmatamento não são os que estão lucrando com isso.
Não, não são.
This man is an inside source from IBAMA, Brazil's Environmental Protection Agency.
Você acha que essa máfia está crescendo?
Bastante.
E o que é que pode acontecer a você se souberem que você está falando com a gente?
Acho um risco muito grande.
Porque podem fazer o quê?
Eles matam. A gente ainda é um eixo aqui.
Se tem esse risco, por que você está falando com a gente?
É importante que as pessoas saibam isso. Tá? Que isso tudo continua acontecendo, está acontecendo mais do que nunca agora. E se ficar isso escondido, isso daí vai se perpetuar.
My source from IBAMA says that at the moment, his agency is losing the battle with the Amazon Mafia.
Como é que é possível isso continuar assim?
Isso continua porque é muito lucrativo. É muito lucrativo.
Então quem é que está lucrando com tudo isso?
Gente com poder político, com poder econômico. Tá? Tem políticos envolvidos nisso.
And corruption in Brazil allows international criminal organizations to reap the benefits.
Quem financia isso ganha muito dinheiro e muitas vezes não está nem na Amazônia.
But getting black market commodities out of the country relies on one key player: the middleman.
Quanto do ouro que passa por aqui é legal?
50% legal e 50% ilegal.
This dealer buys gold from mines all over the Amazon basin. When he has enough, he melts it and sells it to international buyers.
Daqui sai tudo já legalizado ou passa a ser legalizado a algum ponto?
Daí para frente eu não sei como é que eles fazem para legalizar. Eu sei que ele vai viajar legal.
Gold laundering, the mixing of legal and illegal gold, nearly ensures that trafficked gold finds its way into the market.
These massive corporations will turn a blind eye to the mixing of illegally obtained materials with legally obtained materials. And then they can take the certificate of authenticity for the legally obtained stuff and slap it on the whole batch and say, okay, we're good.
And because of this, 90% of Fortune 500 companies that invest in gold can be linked to illegal mines in Latin America.
E isso vale quanto agora em dólares, mais ou menos?
Aproximadamente uns $12.500.
Então tem pessoas acima de você que estão comprando esse ouro e essas são pessoas que estão fazendo muito mais dinheiro com o ouro do que você, né?
Ah, sim, com certeza.
O que você acha das pessoas que falam que, através do teu trabalho, se está matando a Amazônia?
Não sei. Não sei te responder.
Se continuar explorando, que eventualmente a Amazônia, como a gente conhece agora, a floresta vai morrer.
Sim, com certeza. Tanto o garimpeiro, o madeireiro, todo mundo tem uma parcela de contribuição. Então, temos que procurar uma solução, mas tomar uma medida radical de fechar o garimpo para que a Amazônia respire, vai salvar a Amazônia e matar o povo.
After seeing the effects of gold mining firsthand, I'm going deeper into the Amazon, hoping to find those responsible for deforestation's original sin.
The first step in deforestation in the Amazon is usually illegal logging. So there are a few types of wood in the Amazon that are really valuable on the international market, things like mahogany. Loggers will go in, they'll cut down those valuable trees, and then they will just chop down all the rest and then burn them. Then, when the land is cleared from the fires, that can serve as cattle pastures.
Shockingly, an estimated 50% of logging in Brazil is illegal. And the United States is one of the biggest importers of trafficked wood from the Amazon.
Não existe uma ilegalidade isolada, então está tudo associado.
The high stakes have made the jungle a violent place.
O cara que rouba madeira, ele manda matar quem atrapalha ele.
On the edge of the Amazon's protected areas lies a small settlement.
Oi?
I've traveled here to understand what can happen to you when you go up against the Amazon Mafia.
Tudo cresce aqui, né?
É, tudo.
Bom, ótimo.
Osvalinda and Daniel Pereira run a small organic farm surrounded by old-growth timber.
Eles mataram tudo.
Nearly all the forests adjoining their property have been cut down in recent years.
Sair da vossa propriedade e ver tudo morto, tudo desmatado.
Desastre, né? E a madeira tá toda aqui, né? São madeira não sei nem de quantos anos, acho que desde o começo do mundo, né?
The Pereiras have managed to protect and plant new trees on their farm, and they've reported illegal activity to the authorities, which has made them a target of local criminals.
São 5 grupos de madeireiro que se agiam aqui dentro.
Então toda a floresta que foi retirada à volta aqui é tudo ilegal.
Ilegal.
Ilegal mesmo.
One day, after returning to their house, the couple found a local logging boss waiting for them, accompanied by a squad of armed men.
Ele falou dentro da minha cara assim, olha, com esse trabalho seu, você vai morrer que nem a Dorothy.
Brazil has about 30% of the world's biodiversity. And so can you imagine when somebody chops down a tremendous area that burns for 10 days?
Dorothy Stang was an American nun who campaigned for 30 years to stop illegal loggers in the Amazon. In 2005, while walking in the jungle, she was murdered with 6 shots fired at close range. Stang's murder is far from an isolated incident. More than 1,700 people have been killed in land conflicts since 2000. And in this part of the world, where impunity reigns, only 10% of the murders were brought to justice. Following the threats from the local logging boss, the Pereiras awoke one morning to find that someone had crept onto their farm.
Posso ver?
Sim, pode.
Leaving a terrifying warning.
Com cruzes e tudo, hein?
As covas mostrava que era o fim da gente, sabe? Que não era só o ato, não era só a pessoa vir, já era você, tá vendo você morto. E o que não passou, não desejo para ninguém.
The Pereiras continue to receive death threats, but they refuse to let the criminals have their way.
Perdão, Daniel. A nossa luta não pode terminar agora. Nós não tá nessas covas aí, nós tá vivo. E nós vamos lutar.
Por isso que vocês dizem que se é pra morrer aqui, né?
Pra morrer aqui.
Você trabalha pro Ibama. A IBAMA é a agência que deveria estar parando essas madeireiras ilegais, esse desmatamento da Amazônia. Por que vocês não estão fazendo mais?
Porque a gente não consegue. Por causa da quantidade de pessoal que diminuiu para menos da metade. O IBAMA está sendo desmontado por dentro.
My source says the situation got even more dire after the 2018 election of Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro.
É uma falácia dizer que
It is a fallacy that the Amazon is a heritage of humanity, and it is also a mistake to say it is the lungs of the world. Certain countries are using these fallacies, and instead of helping, have started to attack with lies.
When Jair Bolsonaro was elected, a lot changed. Deforestation skyrocketed. There's been a massive rollback in respect for indigenous rights, and Bolsonaro has regularly in public encouraged Amazon deforestation. He's encouraged the arsonists lighting a lot of the fires, and he's defamed a lot of the indigenous leaders. When the head of state is encouraging violence, that sends a very clear message.
According to observers, his administration has effectively given a green light to those who want to destroy the Amazon for profit, which critics say includes the most powerful man in Itaituba. At his riverside mansion, I arrange a meeting with the town's mayor, Valmir Clímaco.
Eu sou a Mariana.
Tudo bem.
Obrigada por receber a gente.
He's not shy about his past as a logger and miner. According to Clímaco's own election filings, he's the subject of 45 federal criminal citations. But his trouble with the law hasn't hurt his popularity.
Fui o prefeito mais bem votado do estado do Pará, com quase 80% dos votos.
Mayor Clímaco now owns cattle ranches and farms cleared from the rainforest, industries responsible for millions of acres of deforestation.
Tem muita gente que olha para o senhor, que vê exemplo de uma pessoa que está fazendo essa exploração da Amazônia.
Sou um homem, vamos dizer assim, muito trabalhador. E quem é trabalhador que cresce, geralmente o povo inventa uma história. Jesus Cristo, quando na Terra, até tinha seus críticos.
É verdade que o senhor foi condenado?
Fui condenado e fui absolvido. Se eu não pudesse, eu não podia ser prefeito. Mas claro que eu estou atrás da minha sobrevivência. Mas um trabalho legal.
Clímaco was acquitted of some charges, though he still faces pending trials for alleged environmental crimes dating back to 2012. However, Clímaco doesn't think mining and logging are hurting the Amazon either way.
Quem dizer que garimpeiro acaba com a Amazônia não tem conhecimento igual eu tenho. Porque garimpo não desmata, não. Você passa em cima de avião, você não vê onde trabalharem. Não é o garimpeiro, não é o madeireiro.
In the Amazon, this is all a seductive argument for those who stand to make huge profits. But it doesn't mesh with the reality I've seen in my time here.
Questão do mercúrio. Já foram estudos feitos, provaram que existe índice muito elevado de mercúrio no rio Tapajós.
Eu desafio que algum médico já deu uma atestada aqui de um paciente que dizer que morreu de azul. Eu já pesei mais de 0,5 tonelada de ouro. Queimei, tô com fogo. Não usava máscara, não usava nada. Nunca senti uma dor numa unha.
Rather than debating the mayor on the merits of inhaling mercury fumes, I want to ask him about the slew of killings in the region, including Dorothy Stang, the American nun.
Tem muita gente que estão tentando preservar a Amazônia sendo mortos. O que o senhor acha disso?
Hoje sou contra as pessoas que mandaram matar. Nós não podemos hoje ser uma freira e estar com um bocado de gente o dia todo no meio da rua querendo invadir o que é dos outros.
With the help of the FBI, Brazilian authorities eventually convicted 2 ranchers of orchestrating Dorothy Stang's murder.
Então o senhor acha que aqueles que estão sendo mortos porque estão invadindo, estão entrando?
Não, ele não é que estão invadindo, ele vem incentivar, ele vem arrumar confusão.
Clímaco's own property lies alongside the ancestral territory of the Munduruku indigenous tribe. For Clímaco, letting them manage the land would be the real travesty.
E na hora que abre a possibilidade do índio mexer com garimpo, índio não tem dinheiro para comprar maquinário, índio não tem coragem de trabalhar.
Despite what Mayor Climaco says, Brazil's indigenous people are now some of the most courageous defenders of the Amazon. Still on the search for illegal loggers, I'm going on patrol with members of the Munduruku indigenous tribe.
We've been going in further and further in for over an hour now. They're actually looking for signs that there's been illegal activity in this area.
I'm on patrol with the Munduruku tribe, trying to catch illegal loggers in the act.
All these cut branches that you see are clear signs that there's been some sort of illegal activity. Usually it's illegal loggers that come here and start cutting the branches so they can go through deeper into the jungle. Look, aquí. This is all evidence that the illegal loggers have been here. You can see the whole structure over there.
This camp has been set up in the short time since the Munduruku last went on patrol.
É perigoso esse trabalho de fiscalização.
Aí a gente fica muito visto pelos pessoal, tanto madeireiro, garimpeiro.
Chief Juarez plans to confront the loggers and force them out of Munduruku territory.
Então, e mesmo quando a gente está indo, vocês já sabem que já tem pessoas trabalhando lá, o senhor fica nervoso?
Eu só vou deixar de lotar depois que eu não tiver conseguindo mais andar.
It's a bullet case, 38 cal. Eles estão muitas vezes...
Não, agora é direto. Tem arma pesado eles. É muito perigoso.
Brazil's indigenous people have increasingly come under violent attack.
Garimpeiros atacaram a aldeia indígena na fazenda Tapajós. O local é residência de uma das principais lideranças da etnia Munduruku.
Um confronto entre garimpeiros ilegais e indígenas deixou pelo menos 5 feridos.
Garimpeiros portando armas de fogo em 7 barcos atiraram contra indígenas.
Even with the chance of an armed encounter, Chief Juarez says it's time to move forward.
They've heard that there's people actually cutting down trees about an hour from here. So he says we should keep going. We'll try to go as far as we can.
As we proceed deeper and deeper into the rainforest, it's hard not to feel completely exposed. Criminals could be behind any bend of the river. After another hour on the water, the chief stops our boat. The loggers have clearly been here.
Então essa árvore para nós, ela é uma árvore sagrada.
They came in with chainsaws to look for trees like this, and they left it behind because they realized it was actually going to fall into the river.
Não é só nós que tem que ver isso. O mundo tem que olhar para isso. É a nossa Amazônia. É por isso que a gente tem que cuidar.
Even with fresh evidence of their work, the chief says the criminals have slipped away. But 2 days later, I get a new lead. After dozens of calls, I finally receive a promising message from a local contact and a former illegal logger.
O chefe da operação vai encontrar vocês lá em estrada de acesso. Vocês não têm autorização nenhuma de mostrar o local exato das filmagens, tá?
It's the access I've been working on for months. But it's in an area with one of Brazil's highest murder rates. I'll be miles and miles from help if anything goes wrong. And as I head out to an undisclosed location, I have no idea what or who I might find.
Okay, this is it.
Okay. Running, guys.
Wait.
Let's do it.
The boss meets me at the access road and says we need to hurry onto the truck so we're not spotted.
Okay, so go in the back of the truck.
It's not an accident that this is a bumpy run. Loggers cut narrow roads hidden under the forest canopy to throw off aerial surveillance.
Whoa, watch out, watch out, watch out! just got stuck. The big truck got stuck. And I have no idea how they plan on taking it out of here.
The truck isn't going anywhere. And on top of that, we're suddenly alone.
The guy who's taking us in just left. So we're stuck here. It's super muddy and wet everywhere.
Stranded in the middle of the jungle with potentially violent criminals operating in the area. And there's nothing to do but wait.
So we're stuck here. Just us and a big illegal logging truck.
After 30 minutes, our contact returns, and he's got some heavy equipment with him. The rainy season is normally a quiet time of the year for the illegal timber trade because of the difficulty reaching the jungle. But these loggers seem to be working harder than ever.
But I mean, it's incredible. It's just in the middle of this thick piece of jungle, and there's just this clearing. And this is what they've done. They've just cleared this all out.
The loggers tell me that just yesterday, a member of another crew was killed during the part of the process I'm watching now.
They're saying it's incredibly dangerous to be behind where the log is going up because it's common that the cables break and it will fall on. So a lot of people have been injured and killed when this happens. They're just these like 2 cables that are pulling the log up to the truck. This is all super sketchy. I mean, they're barefoot, you know? They're doing all of this, a lot of them are barefoot.
It may not be a high-tech operation, but they work fast and efficiently.
So they've done all of this damage that you see here, all this clearing in just the last 2 weeks. E quantas árvores vocês vão cortar hoje?
Um dia nós cortamos aí umas 10, 15 árvores.
E tudo isso é ilegal.
É legal.
E o que aconteceria a vocês se soubessem que vocês estariam fazendo isso?
Nós ia preso.
Vocês têm mais medo de quem? Da polícia, do IBAMA? Quem é que vocês têm mais medo?
Do IBAMA. Polícia não. Polícia não tem medo não.
Por quê?
Rola o dinheiro, né? Eles deixam liberado aí.
Loggers usually take pains to avoid being caught. IBAMA raids mean crippling fines and destroyed equipment. But insiders say the illegal timber trade is operating more openly than in years past.
They say they're going to cut down another tree right now.
The men tell me how they clear the most valuable trees first and are quick to spot which ones to cut next.
Yeah, so they're saying that they think it's going to fall that way, but when it does, when it cracks, that a lot of sort of debris, oh my God. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? So that's it. When you hear that first crack, that means the tree is falling. It's slowly falling. And then you just... Pra onde? Watch out, watch out. Vai pra lá, vai pra lá. Wow. I mean, it's insane. You can feel you can hear the cracks incredibly loud, and then you can feel the whole sort of ground shake.
Knowing that these trees could soon end up in a wood floor or backyard deck somewhere in the US, it's hard to stomach.
Posso ir ver? Okay, let's go see he's saying we can go and see it. The fallen tree. Uau. Não vale muito, não? Porque tá oco, é? Não presta. Não presta pra nada? É mesmo? Vocês não podem utilizar isso? Pra nada? Não usam isso pra nada?
Não dá nada, né? Isso é errado. Não dá nada. Olha.
It's not even worth anything, which makes this whole thing even more depressing. I mean, all of this wasted for nothing.
Seeing this pointless destruction reminds me of what I witnessed at the gold mine. The Amazon is being ravaged based on false hopes by those in the trenches.
Então toda a tua vida tem sido...
Toda a minha vida. Se fechar a madeira, nós vamos passar fome. Nós não sabemos fazer outra coisa e não tem outro meio de vida.
If there's one thing I've learned from reporting on the world's black markets, it's that the people who are getting their hands dirty often feel like they have no other choice. Criminals on the bottom rung of the shadow economy say they're simply trying to survive.
Antes da gente vir, nos avisaram, cuidado, essa gente é perigosa. Já houve ativistas que morreram, que foram mortos, assassinados.
Não, aqui a gente não é assim não, a gente que trabalha do bem, né?
Então quem é que tá matando? Quem são essas pessoas?
É coleiro, pistolagem, é gente grande por trás, né, que paga eles para fazer isso.
Holding those accountable for the murders in the Amazon is seemingly an impossible task. It's no surprise that so many of those killings have gone unpunished. I may never come face to face with those at the top, but I have one last way to expose the Amazon Mafia. I'm going to follow the timber. Under the cover of night, the logs I saw being cut down in the Amazon earlier are transported here to this illegal sawmill. I still want to understand what happens to timber illegally harvested in the Amazon, and if this wood will soon end up in the hands of US consumers.
É isso, mas tem que botar microfone, senão a gente não escuta.
But nobody at the mill wants to talk.
E daqui tá indo pra onde?
A madeira?
Sim.
Não, daí eu não sei. Eu trabalho aqui.
E você sabe se essa serraria se é trabalho legal ou ilegal?
Não, não sei não. Se dizer se é trabalho legal não.
Então por que você tá usando máscara?
Porque é melhor, não dá.
Suddenly, I'm told it's time for us to stop filming. A shipment of cut boards is heading out, and we've been explicitly warned not to follow. It's frustrating to leave without tracking this wood any farther, but I already know where a lot of it is headed.
Sometimes it's a bit of a reveal. When you look at a shipment like this and you open it up, it takes your breath away for a second. To be like, wow, that's not what I was expecting. And you realize how big some of the wood is. You do step back and you put that in perspective. How old was that tree?
At a warehouse near the port of Houston, agents from U.S. Customs and Border Protection are inspecting a new shipment from Latin America.
Some of the wood today is raising red flags. When we look at the documents, the wood states that it's a certain age. When we come here and physically look at the wood, it looks much older than what's on the documents. Therefore, it probably didn't come from the mill. It's on the paperwork, and then we're going to look further into that wood.
As one of the largest timber importers in the world, the U.S. is a prime target for black market organizations. But smuggling trees from the Amazon is a federal crime, in violation of the Lacey Act.
We attempt to catch everything that comes our way. Due to the pure volume of stuff like that, most likely stuff does make it through, but our attempt is to catch everything entering this country.
One estimate now puts the worldwide trade for illegal timber as high as $152 billion.
We are seeing a larger increase in shipments coming out of the Amazon than previous years. So the problem isn't going away, it's only increasing.
Você acha que os consumidores na Europa e nos Estados Unidos sabem que as madeiras que eles estão utilizando são ilegal?
Eu acho que alguém deve desconfiar disso.
There's so much responsibility that we have to address our own contributions to the climate crisis. So many of the companies that are based here are buying and selling the very products that are produced in deforested parts of the rainforest. It comes down to how important is it and how important are we insisting that it be. I think it makes sense to think about the Amazon as a canary in the coal mine, in the sense that if we can't save it, we're doomed.
All these little red dots that are a lot of them, all represent deforestation that has happened in just the last 5 years.
Exactly. 20% of the Amazon rainforest is already deforested. So we reached that level. If we keep deforesting, we may reach a tipping point.
So the death of the Amazon as we know it?
Yes, that's a possible scenario.
Carlos Souza is a researcher for an environmental nonprofit called Amazon. Through satellite technology, they're able to monitor deforestation on a micro level, including the illegal logging site I witnessed myself. It's crazy to think that it looked so massive at the time, and now to think that it's just probably a little tiny little dot.
That's why it's so important to have a near real-time forest monitoring.
Right.
Because you can see the most active areas and go to stop it locally. But we have...
The data is alarming. Dr. Souza says it should be a wake-up call for the entire world. So does that mean that this is it? Where it's completely hopeless? There's nothing we can do about it?
There is hope. First, we have to make sure that they're not purchasing anything from the Amazon that's linked to illegal deforestation. And then we need more international awareness about the problem to convince Brazil to change this path to destruction.
The good news is that it's not too late. And there are still those on the ground fighting against deforestation. Looking at the Amazon from high above, it's striking that there are these islands of intact forest. When you get closer, you notice that many of those areas are indigenous lands. Before leaving the Amazon, I returned to one of those islands, the Munduruku territory. I reunite with tribal leader and activist Alessandra Munduruku. Tonight, the village is having a meeting to discuss how they can fight back against a new bill proposed by the Bolsonaro government. The bill would open up mining in protected areas, like the Munduruku territory.
A gente não vai sair do lugar onde nós nascemos, nós temos crianças, nossos filhos, nosso antepassado sempre viveu aqui. O governo brasileiro não tem direito de nos matar. Ele não tem direito.
The Amazon's hundreds of indigenous tribes have survived conquest, smallpox, enslavement, and assimilation. And the future of our planet might depend on them, standing in the way of the Amazon Mafia.
Será que é tão difícil as pessoas entenderem que nós queremos vida, queremos água, queremos floresta, queremos nossas crianças livres? As nossas crianças estão brincando embaixo da chuva. Elas brincam embaixo da chuva, elas brincam no seu terreno, elas brincam na sua casa. A única coisa que nós fazemos é defender a nossa casa. É aqui que nós vamos ficar, é aqui que nós vamos morrer. É aqui a nossa casa.
But for the Munduruku, stopping powerful criminal networks alone is too much to ask. Foreign governments will have to supply pressure, and consumers will have to investigate where the products they buy come from. And if we are helping to protect the Amazon or destroy it.
When we were going to do a story about assassins, I honestly didn't think that we were going to be filming here in Los Angeles. We're about to meet our contact. Supposedly he's found somebody who's willing to talk to us. You want to come in?
What's up? How you doing?
So he's around here somewhere?
Yeah, he's around the corner. He's just a little nervous and a little iffy about it.
Is he nervous to the point that things can get ugly?
Yes.
It's unsafe for us?
Yes, because Frankie thought like it was a setup. Like if I feel set up, he's like, I'm killing you and everybody else.
Okay, I'm stopping here for a second because I think before we meet him, we should talk. So he's for sure an assassin?
Oh, I seen people pay $80,000 right in front of me.
For a hit?
Yeah, I seen it. His attitude is To me, just like bipolar, like he could be cool and it's like he just like, yeah, that's one crazy right there.
As a journalist covering the underworld, I've seen almost everything that can be trafficked. But there's one trade that's always been just out of reach, where the product is death itself. This is as black as the black market gets.
We have hundreds of gang members, criminals, and people who love to kill for money.
In 2019 and 2020 alone, hitmen murdered nearly 3,000 people around the world, and the killing game shows no signs of letting up.
This is him, right?
Yeah. You guys better block this out.
By covering you.
Everything changing my voice too.
We're changing your voice.
So it's the only chance you guys got. I can easily take all of you out right now. So, you know, I get a little bit nervous, and so that's when my instincts start kicking in,
yeah.
You know? But that's just me.
So I'm going to be blunt and just ask you the question. So you kill people?
Yeah.
Pay you to kill people?
That's what you want to call it. If they got the money for it, I don't hesitate, no questions asked.
Is it always here in the city, in LA, or?
No, I go everywhere.
All around the country?
Yeah, to New York, Chicago, Utah.
How many times have you done it?
I can't tell you that.
More than 10?
It's been a few.
Do you remember the first time you did it?
You never forget.
Is it easy?
Hell no, it's never easy. Never easy. But it always gets done.
Do you do any surveillance beforehand?
I don't know how I do it, how it happens.
Yeah, what?
Now you're getting into details now. I can't tell you that.
Do you have limits, though, or boundaries? Are there certain people that...
Of course.
Like what?
No kids, no girls, no women, no kids.
But a father is okay?
Man, I'm good.
Do you have kids?
Of course.
But there is a part of you that has to feel a little bad, knowing that these are people who love them, right? They have family.
I ain't weak like that, lady. Don't get into my kids or talk about my kids anymore.
Okay, I won't talk about your kids anymore.
But now you're making me feel about my kids now. I'm getting a little bit tired now.
You're getting tired?
A little bit irritated, yeah. I'm kind of short-tempered sometimes. We done?
Okay. I mean, if you have to leave, you have to leave.
And just like that, the interview is over.
Bye.
I have so many more questions. So much more I want to know about hitmen and what they do. But assassins are paid to silence their victims and to stay silent about it. In my career, I've run into many people who kill for a living. Sicarios in Mexico.
No se me olvida, quiso meter la mano encima y gritó, no. Le pegué 2 tiros en la cara.
Gang members in Brazil and Colombia.
Tá super feo. Después, él me entregó un machete y me tocó que collarlo.
Even a hitman in Amsterdam.
Would you shoot a journalist if you were paid to?
Yeah, for free.
It's a global phenomenon. Hitmen make headlines around the world.
A hit squad pulls up and a hooded assassin unloads.
Yet, little is known about how contract killers actually work or what drives them to make a living out of killing. For that, I need to go to a country where they thrive like few others. South Africa, where news of the latest hit is an almost daily occurrence.
Yet another whistleblower has been gunned down.
He was assassinated, ambushed by 2 gunmen.
In the last 7 years alone, assassins here have killed more than 1,000 people. I want to know how that's possible.
How far are we, more or less?
Like 2 minutes.
Okay, so we should start getting closer to you guys here, right?
All right, all right.
I'm on my way to the epicenter of South Africa's assassination epidemic.
So we're following the white Range Rover. The two cars are full of bodyguards, one in front and one right behind. This is where things start to get a little heated. So we have to make sure, oh, look at that.
This is not gang territory or cartel country. Incredibly, it's a minibus taxi center, where I'm headed to meet a man with a target on his back.
Look at that. This is insane. I mean, seriously, he's more protected than the president, it seems. Okay, so I'm gonna go out and meet him. Hi, Yanda. How are you? Nice to meet you. You're the most important person in South Africa, it seems, from all your security guys.
Yeah, I would say in this area, I'm the most important person, yes.
Yanda is what is known in South Africa as a taxi boss. He runs a fleet of 500 minibus taxis. A lucrative gig, but not for the faint of heart.
So why so much protection and what's happening around us?
I've been attacked 5 times.
You've been attacked 5 times?
Yes.
By whom?
By the opposition. There's always an opposition. I've been told they are paid more than $1 million
To try to kill you?
to kill me, yes.
In South Africa, the taxi game is big business. The industry transports nearly 70% of South African commuters, with an estimated 10 million commuter trips every day, raking in around $4.7 billion a year. And with so much money at stake, the fight to control the most lucrative routes is brutal.
Police have launched a massive manhunt following a deadly attack on a fully loaded taxi.
A quick search online brings up dozens of videos and news clips that paint a gruesome portrait of the industry.
This latest incident has highlighted the problem of taxi violence.
Rival taxi syndicates torch each other's vehicles. Shootouts are common. And for some taxi bosses, hiring hitmen to take out their competition is the fastest way to higher profits.
Streets have become hunting grounds for assassins involved in an ongoing taxi feud.
Taxi people only believe in one thing. They believe that in order for you to control this, you must kill this person, you know? Even the last incident, I had one bullet, AK-47, stuck in my head.
No.
Those are the
wow.
scars, as you can see.
I see it, yeah. And the people that shot at you, were they hired hitmen?
Yes, hired hitmen. We call them Inkabi.
Do you always feel on edge when you're here in your
Always,
place?
because whenever I'm here, I'm not safe. I always have my firearm. This is my baby.
So if you were to leave right now and walk outside without your bodyguards, what would happen? How long do you think you'd last before somebody tried to shoot at you?
Not more than 15 minutes.
Wow. It's a crazy way to live like that.
Yeah.
Yanda's rivals, the people who he says have hired hitmen to kill him, have their base just around the corner. And he wants to show me what happens when he gets close to their turf.
This feels a lot more unprotected. We're not surrounded by your taxis.
Yes, yes, yes. That side, that's where, if we go there, because anything can happen.
Should we stay here?
No, let's come a little bit, yes.
I'm with you. I'll do whatever you say is safe.
As you can see, those taxis parked there.
Oh, yeah. All the vans over there, that's another parking lot, and that's his rivals, the other taxi association, and the people who he says have been trying to kill him.
Yes, that's correct. Some are coming.
Oh, yeah. They all came out with their own guns. Oh, this is so crazy. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 armed guys, right, walking right towards us. That is crazy. So now they seem to be talking.
But you can see that they're not happy.
No.
I'm in South Africa with a taxi boss facing down his rivals. Rivals, he says, have hired a hit squad to take him out.
Are we poking the bear a little bit too much here? Are we?
Yes, kind of. But this is our daily life.
Yeah, he's waving us away, saying, go, go, go. And they were obviously not happy that we were there. I mean, I can see how things can change really fast. And
yes.
This can become bad.
Oh, anytime.
The taxi business accounts for nearly half of all assassinations in South Africa, and it's become a breeding ground for hitmen.
How easy is it to hire Inkabi here?
Very easy. In fact, they come to you and ask for a job. Is there anyone we can kill for you?
No.
Yeah.
That's happened?
Yeah, that happens.
Have you ever hired a hitman?
Yes, I have.
To kill somebody else?
To do the same thing that they're doing to me.
You were trying to kill the person who was trying to kill you?
Yes, that's correct.
It seems to be a bit of a cycle, right? Because somebody tries to kill you, you try to kill somebody else, and it seems like it's a never-ending cycle of violence.
That's how it's been happening, and I don't think anyone can be able to stop this.
It's a never-ending cycle of violence that Yanda knows all too well. But when I ask him if he could connect me with a hitman, he says no.
As they've got a lot of enemies. I'm their #1 target. Yeah, I'm not safe.
What he did tell me was this. Some taxi bosses have a side hustle, running networks of assassins that they hire out for high-paying hits on whistleblowers, business leaders, and politicians. We're joining an elite anti-gang unit on a raid as they close in on one of these assassin networks.
We're heading for the house that is believed to belong to a taxi boss. It's a convoy of about 20 cars and about 35 men.
We're in one of Durban's vast urban slums, created during the country's era of forced racial segregation, known as apartheid. It was a violent system designed to keep black South Africans in poverty, and its dark legacy remains.
There's information that this taxi boss has Inkabis, commonly known as hitmen, that are wanted staying in his premises. So we just got to be vigilant.
As we pull up, the SWAT team storms the house.
Look, look. Oh, yeah. Do you see them? Fred, you want to follow?
7 years of breaching tool.
So they're breaching the door right now. Okay, so he says that this is what they can't go closer. For a dozen men, sort of securing the premise, watching all windows and access points. I'm gonna go behind you, yeah?
Is it clear? Clear?
Is it clear? It seems to be clear right now. So they have a suspect here on the floor right here, and they're still searching.
Is a rifle there? Okay.
So far, they've recovered 3 firearms, and I believe they have 1 more suspect being taken out now.
The police tell me the suspected hitman was caught with an illegal automatic weapon and was dressed in the uniform of a private security company, which I've heard is a disguise that hitmen here often use. That's because in South Africa, licensed security guards, like Yanda's men, are allowed to carry fully automatic firearms, not available to the average person.
Oh, so that's the assault rifle? What kind is it?
This thing looks R5.
An R5.
So this is similar to a police automatic rifle that our members carry.
Wow, how do they get their hands on these guns?
Well, we'll have to check whether they are stolen. So at this stage, we do not know.
South Africa is awash with illegal firearms. More than 2 million of them. And they're fueling the assassination epidemic. Unlicensed weapons are harder for the police to trace, which makes it easier for the assassins to do their work. Globally, assassins are known to use car bombs, IEDs, and poison. But firearms are their weapon of choice. So if I want to find an active hitman, my best bet is to follow the trail of illegal guns. I head north to the outskirts of Johannesburg to meet a contact who can help.
Rudy,
Woody,
come on in. You tell me how to go, right?
turn left.
This guy that we're meeting, what can you tell me about him? Is he...
He can organize weapons.
Oh, so he buys and sells weapons?
Buy and sell weapons, yeah. Go right here. Yeah, you can put down the cameras.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put cameras down, guys. We're getting close.
The organizer, who we'll call Vusi, is running late. And when he finally arrives, he explains why.
Okay, so you went to the police station, is that right? Why?
The person that I'm working with in the police station, he wanted to give us something.
So the 9mm, you got that from the police?
Yes. Say they arrest you with a gun today. That gun, they're going to sell to somebody like me.
Vusi tells me that he's bought dozens of handguns from the police. His source for heavy weapons is equally shocking.
These assault rifles, those ones are from the army.
You get them from the military?
Yes.
And what kind of weapons are we talking about?
Maybe an R5, R4.
The R5 is the same model assault rifle I saw the police confiscate from a suspected hitman.
Most of your clients use it for what?
Armed robbery and assassinations.
We really want to meet an Inkabi, a hitman who's currently active. Do you know anyone that you could introduce us to?
I don't know if he will agree, but there is one.
Unfortunately, his assassin turns us down. But I get lucky. Another local source comes through with an introduction.
But this is it. It's after many weeks trying to get a hitman to talk to us. It looks like we finally have one who's agreed.
It's still surreal to me that this profession even exists, that someone kills for a living. I'd feel more comfortable if assassins remained a Hollywood trope, with their cool detachment from death,
Ahora vas a conocer a Dios.
their effortless mastery of weapons, and their impressive Old Testament knowledge.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance.
I do this for a living!
But the reality is much less slick. And in a way, perhaps more scary.
So, Jojo, right?
Yes.
It's okay if I call you Jojo?
Yes, fine.
Well, how did you start? How did you get into this business?
There's always a killing that needs to be done. Every day, somebody needs to die. Whether drugs, taxis, even politics now. It's busy. Constantly, people need to die.
I'm in South Africa, investigating the world of professional assassins.
Jojo, did you go to school?
Yes, went to college. It was very hard to find work. Then there's no money coming in. Then you meet yourself with other people selling drugs. You be like a hitman for the person selling drugs.
And how many people do you think you've killed in your life?
In total, I would say close to 30.
Close to 30 people.
Yes, I would say. Now, how do I put this? Killing is it's part of our routine. We don't even want to know what he did or who he is. As long as he has money, we don't care.
How much do you get paid per hit?
If it's 100K, you end up getting roughly 25 or 30K.
So that's about $1,400, more or less.
Yes.
Who gets the rest?
I don't go alone. You're not John Wick, so you need backup.
So how many people do you work with?
3, and then the driver. If I kill you, I have to kill your backup too. Your brothers, your friends. They must also die.
One thing that we've heard is that the police are sometimes even warned when there's going to be a killing.
Yeah, and most of the time they know. If you have police under your payroll, they'll do as you say. Then you just go in and then you do the hits.
Why do you think the situation is so bad in South Africa?
Poverty. You know, South Africa is not a poor country. It's just that the rich people keep the wealth to themselves. Then the below average people, you struggle to live.
Jojo reminds me of some of the other killers I've met. Mostly young, always poor, driven to crime because they believe it's the only choice they have. In Mexico, these young men saw it as a shockingly normal career path. In Amsterdam, this hitman grew up in a violent drug-dealing family.
First my brother and I, and then my other brother, my nephew, other nephew.
They're all killers?
Killers and dealers.
It's a grim reality. And as I heard in Los Angeles too, it often starts young.
How old were you the first time?
I want to say I was about 18. That's all I saw. Growing up, the gangbanging, the killing, the drug sales, all that. I survived. I had to fight a lot. I had to do what I had to do. It's the way life is. Heartless. You either survive or you die. You as an average person, it's either you die crying or you die fighting. It's your choice.
Do you mind me asking what your parents did?
They passed away when I was very young, both of them.
Were they killed?
Yes. That was the turning point. I started carrying a knife in my pockets because your parents are your protection. Now I don't have protection anymore.
What did you think of the person that killed your parents?
I wanted to kill them very badly.
So you do realize that you're doing the same thing to other kids, right? You had a really hard life because your parents were killed, and you're basically doing the same thing to other children.
Yeah, I never thought it that way, but
You never thought about this?
never ever. But most of the time, make myself feel better because I know the people I'm going after are also bad people.
But are they? Do you consider yourself a bad person?
Yeah. I've been in this thing for a very long time. I think along the way, I lost who I am.
Yeah, I mean, it was it is horrible what he does. It is horrible, horrible. It's the worst thing you can do as a human being is to take another human being's life. But at the same time, you hear his story and you can understand how people fall into this pattern and this cycle of violence, of his parents being killed and then himself becoming a killer. As controversial as this may sound, I felt sorry for him, yeah, but I feel more sorry for the people that he's killing and for the families of the people that he's killing, of course, but yeah, it's a really hard one, yeah.
Still, the next stop on this journey is clear. If I really want to understand assassins, I need to understand the damage they do.
A hit has been taken out on you or your husband. We also know that you drop off your kids. It's just a matter of days. You guys will be murdered.
I heard the gunshots. Then I started panicking. I rushed outside. That's when I found him.
Johanna Peña's husband, Eric, was assassinated in October of 2022. Witnesses say 2 hitmen opened fire on Eric's car minutes after he dropped his children off at school.
I still have flashbacks of him lying in the car with the bullet holes. I tried to call his name, sweetie, wake up,
So sorry. So sorry.
Johanna and Eric ran a technology company that was working with the government on a project when they noticed a government official trying to steal funds. Johanna says her husband reported the fraud to the police and then testified against the official. His honesty proved fatal. Johanna and her children are now in hiding, afraid the hitman will return to kill them.
My daughter was like, Mama, what kind of a life are we living? Because after we buried my husband, they were still following us. They went to their school. I remember covering her. I'm like, it's fine, I can die, but God let her live. And it's hard living in fear. My kids are in pain. They're fatherless. They miss their dad. I miss him. I miss my best friend.
There's some nice houses here, huh?
Very nice. Shopping, movies, you can bring your girlfriend here on a date.
Jojo wasn't involved in Eric's killing. But as I ride with him through Durban, I'm very aware of the parallels.
So if you do have a target who would live in a neighborhood like this, how would you go about it?
You first have to learn their routine, trace them through social media, look at the places they go to, the people they usually tag in their posts. Everything has to be discreet, it has to be perfect. If it's a residential neighborhood like this, there's many ways you can go in, You can be dressed as police, knock on the door.
Wait, dressed as police? How do you get a police uniform? Is that easy?
Oh yes, it's easy. You'll have one police who can just sell us a few.
Do they know what it's for?
Yes, they know.
So, is that your preferred method?
That's the easiest and more preferred method. I'll walk up right here.
Right here?
Yes. As they're talking, there's not suspecting like that. I walk right up, If I feel like greeting, I'll greet them, then just shoot them in the head. Chest and head. Head is to make sure that they're definitely gone.
Have you ever shot women and children as well?
Women, no. There has been situation where there were kids.
But that you
killed the father and we left.
But the kids were there in the house as well?
I don't want to think about it too. I'd rather get drunk. That's our coping mechanism. You can't be sober every day doing this.
It's hard to hear these details and not think about what Joanna and her children are now going through. But it's telling that she doesn't blame the hitman.
I blame the police. They failed us. They knew the suspects. They could have done something about it.
Following Eric's assassination, the police tracked down the hitman. They found the cars they drive and an address where they're known to frequent.
They know the suspect and they're not doing anything.
So nobody has been arrested? Nothing has happened to anyone? Because
No.
you think that it's related to the business deal, the contract that you...
Yeah.
For sure.
100%. 100%.
Time and again, this is what we've heard.
If you have police under your payroll, they'll do as you say.
So the 9mm, you got that from the police?
Yes.
But I want to understand how deep the corruption goes. And for that, I need to speak to someone on the inside.
Well, he told us to meet him in P6, and hopefully he'll be there. Lawrence? What you're doing is not only risky, but incredibly brave.
That's why I'm putting the mask. Because of the target. It's very dangerous. I will be killed.
Because there's so much risk in doing this, why did you want to talk to us?
Police are scared of criminals, but the truth need to be told.
This is Torrance. It's not his real name. He spent over 25 years in the South African Police Service.
I've seen it so many times, the police themselves giving the criminals their own uniform to kill people.
You actually saw some of your colleagues give their uniform to criminals, to hitmen.
Yes. The police themselves, when they recover the guns, they go back and sell them.
Have you seen that? It's happening?
Yeah, I've seen it so many times.
With your own eyes, like you saw it?
In my own eyes.
They know full well that these are assassinations, that people are going to be murdered.
Definitely. They've got the rotten police inside. That they'll advise those criminals. They'll tell those criminals what to do, how to do.
Do you know police officers who also became hitmen?
Yes, there is.
So they work for the hitman, and in some cases, they're hitmen themselves.
Yeah, and definitely. If you are arrested, you'll buy the police inside the prison.
Wherever murder goes unpunished, contract killings become a tool of the powerful. A way to protect corrupt interests. That's true in Mexico, when drug cartels slay journalists.
4 journalists have been killed in Mexico in just the past 2 months.
In the Amazon, when illegal loggers kill activists.
A Peruvian environmentalist and 3 other community leaders have been killed in a region bordering Brazil.
Or in the Netherlands, when drug gangs silence witnesses before a trial.
Mafia-style murders in the Netherlands has led to questions about whether drug gangs are threatening the rule of law.
The fear of assassination becomes a powerful tool of control. Especially when the institutions supposed to be fighting back are in on the take.
This is not just a handful of cops that are corrupt. You're talking about systemic corruption. How far up do you think the corruption actually goes in South Africa?
Up to the top level. Nobody can stop it, no matter how much they try.
Why not?
Because of the people that are inside.
So every single person we spoke to for the story has mentioned police corruption. This is Becky Chelly, South Africa's Minister of Police.
Your job is to enforce the law.
Once an activist who spent time in the same prison as Nelson Mandela and survived an assassination attempt at the hands of the apartheid regime. We've heard police selling guns, police being involved in assassination plots. It's systemic corruption. What do you say to that?
I think it's exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
There are very, very corrupt and dangerous cops, but that number does not surpass the number of the good police. That there are many good cops.
Some of the things that we've heard is that the police have been clearing the area for assassinations to take place, renting their own uniforms for the hitmen to disguise themselves as police. It's more than just corruption. It's that they are actually actively involved in these killings, in these assassinations.
And it's not denied.
So that you have knowledge that this is happening.
Exactly. No doubt about it. People are dying.
In 2016, South Africa created a special task force to address its assassination crisis. Since then, Becky Chelly says 337 assassins have been arrested.
Unfortunately, among those people that you have arrested for those matters are 47 members of the South African Police Service.
Well, that's an enormous number, but that doesn't make you feel any safer to think that those are the people that have been arrested, so you can only imagine how many are out there.
There are many of them, no doubt about it. But it would be unfair to say that government is not fighting back on this cause. Have we won? No. Are we doing something? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very fair. Minister, one more question. You have fought hard for democracy in this country. You yourself were an activist. You were arrested while fighting for democracy in this country. Is this the democracy that you envision when you have widespread and systemic corruption, like you said, but also when people try to fight it, they can be killed? I spent time with this woman, and it's a story I will never forget. Her name is Johanna Pena. I'm with Becky Chelly, South Africa's Minister of Police. Her husband and her started exposing corruption within the government and started receiving death threats. She went to the police, gave them all the evidence. The police did nothing, and a few weeks later, her husband was killed. So what would you say to people like Johanna? And there are many of them out there.
Well, South Africa has a very high degree of murders, but there are many of them that have been prevented to be hit. Unfortunately, those stories don't make their way to the media. But
so you know about this case?
I have heard about it, yes.
Because I think the message that it sends is more than just killing one person. It sends a message of fear.
No, you can't accept that. The effort, let me admit, not adequate, is not enough. Yes, we have a problem, but we are fighting it.
Ultimately, though, fighting this black market is more difficult than most. There's no product to bust, no supply chain to track. Just a simple agreement between a corrupt client and a willing contractor, desperate enough to be selling the unthinkable. Johanna, do you think that the people that did this, do you think they're aware of what they did, of the suffering?
They don't care. They don't care. They are just hitmen. They are working. And for them is to make money.
I don't even think of these people. I don't want to lie. I don't even remember their faces. I'm just trying to live. I'm just trying to survive.
I sense that the only way Jojo and some of the other hitmen I've met can justify the savagery of their work is to convince themselves that they have no other choice, that there's no going back.
Whatever they're trying to make you see in the movies and all that, just doesn't work like that. So, I gotta save my ass. You gotta remember that. If I go to jail, ain't nobody gonna be there to feed me. Nobody gonna be there to take care of me. I gotta take care of my own.
In time, killing becomes the only thing they know, whether that's in South Africa, Mexico, or Los Angeles.
Would you want to get out of this if there was another way of making as much money?
Honestly, no.
Why not?
It's gotten to the point I like it.
So you're not just saying this because we've got cameras. You actually feel this way.
Yes, man. I like it. And I've gotten real good at it.
In South Africa, hitmen perform a traditional ritual, bathing in blood and bile, to protect themselves from the spirits of the people they've murdered.
If there's one thing I'm afraid of, that's God. I feel bad thinking of my last days, you know, Judgment Day. Problems from the past will catch up to me. If you kill somebody, people are looking for you. That's guaranteed.
I can't imagine choosing a life like the one Jojo has chosen. Assassins wield the power of life and death. But they're also vulnerable, expendable, and infinitely replaceable. They're part of a culture of killing that grows in places where corruption and greed rule. Places that have little respect for the rule of law.
To be quite honest, none of it is worth it. You know, I've had to run for years. I've had to go in hiding. It was not easy. And I have been wanting to stop for a very long time. But sometimes you're in too deep.
It's a vicious cycle. When assassins kill, they do more than silence a person. They silence the truth, instill fear, embolden the corrupt and powerful, and leave the poor with fewer and fewer choices.
He's crying, saying, please stop, please stop.
Why didn't you stop?
Because he didn't send money.
This is a story about a new kind of scam.
Sextortion.
Sextortion. It's called sextortion.
One that feeds on loneliness and thrives at the crossroads of desperation and greed.
I send this your wife. I send this your son. I send this your family.
They are familiar on how to befriend, to build the trust and relationship to their victims.
All it takes is one message from a stranger, one moment of trust, one compromising photo to change everything.
9 months ago tomorrow, I lost my 17-year-old son to suicide.
This is a journey from the bedrooms of America to the back alleys of the Philippines, as I search for some of the most ruthless scammers on the planet.
Oh.
Idadalhin pa niya sa malayo at hindi ka talaga niya makakauwi.
Guys, I think we need to go. It's not safe here. Sinabi po namin di gawin mo.
No, you did not.
He was going to college. He was about to graduate to become a teacher. The weekend before, he came to my house and stayed. We went to a soccer game and we just had a lot of fun. And then Sunday he left to go home. And that night is when the trouble started.
Jake was at home and he received a private message on Facebook. The message was from a beautiful young woman, sweet and flirtatious. But the conversation quickly took a turn.
This is his phone.
His phone. Do you mind if I see it? He says, go face a big mirror and take a full nude photo of you or a video. If you can't do that, then we can't play. And then he asks, how do I know I can trust you? You and me are just going to play and have fun. No need for trust issues.
And then he does take it at one point.
Oh my, and immediately, it was within seconds, they said, so just added and save all your Facebook friends on my laptop. I am going to send them your nude photo and post it all over your friend's Facebook timeline and also to your job. But I will not do that if you can send me money right now, okay?
Jake has become a victim of sextortion, a blackmail scam in which the criminal coerces someone into sharing sexual pictures or videos and then threatens to release them if they're not paid. The person chatting with Jake gives him instructions for making an in-person wire transfer. Only then will they delete the photo he sent.
And they're pressuring him and pressuring him. Are you going now? Don't make me wait any longer, or else.
It's like they were hounded him every step of the way.
Oh my God.
So he didn't have time to think it through, you know?
Yeah. And then he sends a photo of the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now he's asking, can you please delete it? I am a college student and I don't have that much right now. Can't live the next 2 weeks with you blackmailing me. You are ruining my life, please. You are my slave now.
Jake's blackmailer continues to taunt and pressure him. And after dozens of messages back and forth, Jake reaches a breaking point.
I have decided that if the picture posts, then I will end my life so I don't have to go through the pain and embarrassment as I lose my job, my education, and family. I hope when you find out that I am serious that you will feel guilt.
So the next day, he ended up hitting a shotgun and he took his life. So this happened from Sunday until Friday.
Do you have the letter that he wrote for you too?
Uh-huh. It says, dear Mom, I love you so much and it pains me to write this. I am sorry for what I've done. I have nothing to live for anymore. I have made a huge mistake that I can't live with. I lost my way and I couldn't get back. You were a great mother, never doubt that. I love you dearly, Mom. You will always be my mother and I will always be your baby boy. Love, Jake. In such a short time, they destroyed my son.
It's the most devastating loss a parent can face. And Cindy is not alone. Sextortion is on the rise. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says that sextortion is one of the primary dangers that kids face online right now. In 2022 alone, 7,000 reports were filed with law enforcement in the US, and more than a dozen cases resulted in suicide.
The blackmailers demanded $3,500 or they'd spread his provocative photos around town.
Teenage boys are most at risk. Experts say they aren't used to being targeted in this way. They may be more likely to take a blackmailer's threat seriously and more fearful of asking for help.
He was just too ashamed.
But Jake refused to let his blackmailer have the last word. Not only did he keep all the messages, but in his letter to his mom, he told her exactly where to find his scammer.
Look at my phone and read the messages that are in the Kik app.
A sender, does he have a name here?
Yes, yes, it will.
Oh,
grill.
here, first name Maurice, last name Abril.
I think he left the information and I believe he wanted me to be able to do something.
With the clues he left behind, local authorities were able to trace the money to a small town in the Philippines. But the effort stopped there. After reaching out to authorities in the Philippines, the sheriff's office claimed that there was nothing else they could do because the perpetrator was outside their jurisdiction.
It's happening over and over, and it just feels like nothing's been done. I understand that my son pulled the trigger, but they pushed him to do that. It feels like a murder.
As a mother of a young teenage boy, Cindy's story has really affected me. And as a journalist, I want answers. Who are the scammers pushing American teens to suicide? And what can be done to stop this crime? I've come to Manila, the capital of the Philippines, to try to track down Jake's blackmailer and learn more about this industry.
To coerce them, the amount of ransom would take as high as 500 to 1 million pesos.
I'm talking to Fernando, an investigative local journalist who's covered cybercrimes for over a decade. He wants to remain anonymous out of fear of the criminals he reports on.
This is a calling, this is passion, and this is no easy job because it's risky. It's really risky.
The Philippines is a major tech hub and a hotspot for cybercrime.
Why is the Philippines such a center of sextortion?
First thing, we're an English-speaking country. They are familiar on how to befriend, to build trust and relationship to their victims. Number two, they can easily, work without authorities noticing them.
Since sextortion scammers can work from anywhere on any device, these criminals are particularly hard to catch.
How can you, raid this industry, this huge industry? You can't just do it overnight.
One of the stories we've been following is an American young man called Jake who committed suicide. And the name of the person that he sent money to here in the Philippines is Maurice Abril. Did you ever hear about this name?
No, really.
It's not a name that's come across your radar at all?
Maurice is a common name in the Philippines. The perpetrator of the sextortionist might be using a pseudonym. They can just use fake IDs. It's not difficult in the country.
So where's the center of this all in the Philippines? Where should we be spending most of our time in?
That it's scattered all over the north.
North of Manila.
North of Manila.
Fernando directs us to Angeles City. This city has earned an international reputation for sex tourism. Hundreds of women and girls are trafficked into the city each year. Everywhere I look, I see Filipina girls with older white men. Prostitution may be technically illegal in this country, but here in Angeles City, sex tourism is booming in plain sight. Typically, I'd meet an underground contact in a secret location, but not tonight. My contact tells me to meet her at her work and to come in through the front door.
Wow.
Inday ng buhay ko, ikaw ay nasaan?
Here in Angeles, there's a lot poor, difficult life, so there's a lot they do.
This is Yumi, a drag performer who dances at a local gay bar. But like many in Angeles City, she turned to scamming during the pandemic. After her show, Yumi took me backstage to share her story. She tells me she started a virtual relationship with a German man. But when he suggested that they turn their chat sexual, Yumi started recording.
We have a sex videos.
So you had video sex, and you recorded that sex,
Yeah.
that video.
Yes. Then I said, I will do something you not like it.
Mhm.
And then he said, what? I send this your wife. I send this your son. I send this your family. I send this your old friend.
Did he send you the money?
Yeah, he sent.
How much money did he send you?
950,000.
1,000 pesos. So he ended up giving you or sending you $3,000.
Yeah.
The money was easy, really easy. So Yumi started extorting other men she was chatting with online.
When people stopped paying you, did you ever actually share those videos or photos with the family members or friends?
No, because I can get some money. That's
Mhm.
enough.
You know a lot of people that have done this kind of blackmailing,
Yeah,
sextortion?
I have a lot friend blackmail.
Hmm. Do they do it like you, by themselves? Or
No, they have group. They have a room.
full of people working on the computer?
Yes.
Yumi is a lone wolf scammer, someone who preys upon her own online contacts to make a few extra bucks a month. But what she's describing is a more ambitious operation, set up like a legal call center. A sea of cubicles staffed with employees whose sole job is to scam and extort money from foreigners.
There is a name of a person that we have been trying to find. Her name is Marise Abril. Have you ever heard of anyone called Marise Abril?
Marise Abril.
No, you haven't heard.
Yumi says that she's not involved in sextortion anymore. After doing it a few times, she started feeling bad for her victims. We hit a dead end until one of Fernando's inside sources sends us a lead on a sextortion ring 30 miles north in Bulacan.
Kailangan pong makakuha ng pera. Lalo na po na mahirap po talaga yung buhay. At saka marami po kasi akong anak.
This is a scammer we'll call Claudia. Before she got involved in sextortion, she was earning $6 a day selling tea towels while trying to care for her 8 children.
Kasi hindi naman po kasi ako sanay sa ganun trabaho po talaga. Kumbaga, syempre nga, di ba, sa kahirapan. Kaya ako pinasok po yung ganun.
Claudia was recruited by a friend who told her she could make 10 times more money in sextortion. She started working in an office much like this one. The only difference was that Claudia's had armed guards at the door.
You started chatting mainly with foreigners? Which countries?
US, UK, edad na.
How did the structure inside the group work?
Ayun po, kumbaga parang may team po kasi kami niyan eh. Kung ano po, yung mga ganong manager, supervisor.
So there's a supervisor basically walking and making sure you're doing your job.
Like office po.
Claudia was assigned the role of a chatter, the person who sends messages to the victim and records their interactions. She worked on Facebook and Instagram, but chatters have also been known to use encrypted messaging apps and dating platforms like Tinder and Bumble.
After you got them to do the video, somebody else would start the blackmailing and somebody else would get the money. When the victims send the money, who do they send the money to? Was it to you or who was the money sent to?
Ibang tao po, ibang pangalan. At ibang lugar din po. Kapwa chatter din po. Yung pagdadala po ng pera ng foreigner, ibang tao po yun. Tapos, kukunin ng ibang tao yun, tapos papadala sa amo. Hindi po nila talaga sinasabi mga pangalan nila, yung mga boss.
Because of the intimacy of the crime, I had always imagined that sextortion scammers work one-on-one with their victims. But Claudia is describing a highly organized operation. This means that Jake's scammer, Marise Abril, if that's even her real name, might have been a part of a much bigger machine. There may have been a whole team of sextortion workers manipulating him. Claudia either doesn't know who the big boss is, or she doesn't want to tell me. But I have to know who's at the very top. While these scamming operations are constantly in flux and difficult to track, one person keeps popping up in our investigation.
Ang tinaguriang sextortion queen na si Maria Cecilia Caparas.
Ang tinaguriang cyber sex queen ng North Zaguray, Bulacan na si Maria Cecilia Caparas.
She goes by many names: Maria Cabrera, Cabreras, Caparas, Maria Cecilia. And rumors have it that she invented the sextortion scam.
She was considered as a sextortion queen because she's the head of this big industry operating and victimizing foreign victims.
Maria grew up in the slums of Manila, relying on work in the cyber porn industry for survival. At some point, it seems like Maria decided to turn the tables. She started building a criminal empire that targets foreign men. She's been arrested many times, once in a high-profile Interpol-led raid, but she's always inexplicably released.
She's not in prison. We don't know where she is now.
So our goal here was to find Marie Zabril, but there is a chance that actually we're looking for the wrong person.
There's a chance, yeah.
And we should be looking for the head of the syndicate, Maria Cabreras, because there is a good chance that it was part of her syndicate that did this to Jake.
Exactly. I've talked to one of the person involved. She told me about Maria Cabrera, that they're connected.
Wow, that's huge.
I want to work my way up to the top, to the person credited with the birth of this industry, the same industry responsible for Jake's death. Fernando's contact could be my way in.
Okay, so you're going to talk to her and see if she agrees to talk to us.
Yes. I think the first thing that she would ask me is for her safety.
What's the is it the authorities? What are they concerned about?
This is a person involved in scamming activity.
So bruised, their whole back is bruised. Ooh, they were beat?
Yes, she was trying to escape.
Oh my God.
You'll never know what will happen to them.
I think this is it. We got a call last night telling us that one of the scammers he knows has agreed to speak to us. It's in this property that we've been driving now for a few minutes. But supposedly at the end of this road, there's a house where this person is waiting for us.
Kung ako, nasa 20, 25. Ang Amerikano ko mostly sa akin.
Jamie, not her real name, is known as one of the most prolific scammers in this area.
Have you ever actually went through with the blackmail and sent the video to the family or friends when they don't pay?
Meron na.
You have? Really?
Nagbigay lang ko na parang ID. Parang buti nga sa'yo, parang yan.
Did you feel bad about doing that? Maybe you ruined this person's life? Do you think about that?
Yung pandemic, parang ang sama-sama ng ugali ko, parang gano'n na wala akong puso, walang gano'n. Dahil nga, tayo nun, talagang ultimo yung, wala akong ipon kasi nun eh. Wala kaming kapera-pera. Super evil talaga. Ganun ako, wala akong puso. Kahit mamatay ka yan sa harapan ko, wala akong pakialam. Makuha ko gusto ko.
Before the pandemic, Jamie says she earned money competing in transgender beauty pageants, popular events in the Philippines that can be a path out of poverty. But those events were canceled during the pandemic, and to make matters worse, trans women were excluded from government assistance. Transphobia in the mainstream workforce limits career options. That's why many in Jamie's community turned to sex work for survival. But Jamie discovered another path.
When did you find out about sextortion?
Meron po kasing pumunta sa amin sa lugar. Isa pong babae. Yung babae na yun, napakayaman. Nanay-nanayan namin, mamang madam. So ngayon, siya yung nag-practice sa amin kung magpapano yung gano'n.
We heard a lot about the queen of sextortion, as she is known, Maria Cabrera.
Ayun.
That's her?
Yes. Siya yung talagang nag-start dito ng pag-i-scam.
Maria Cabreras is known to recruit impoverished youth. She has plucked dozens, if not hundreds, of teens off the streets. She taught Jamie and these other young scammers how to find victims, how to flirt with them, and how to use pre-recorded videos ripped from porn sites to fool them into thinking they were interacting with real people.
Idadaling ka niya sa malayo at hindi ka talaga niya makakauwi.
How young do they start?
13 years old lang.
Wow, that's my son's age. I can't imagine him not only scamming, but also seeing these videos and these photos from the victims. It's so young. What can happen to you if Maria finds out you are talking to us?
Hindi akong patayin ni Maria. Pwede ko din papatay kasi kaya niya magbayad. Saka marami yung alaga.
Really? So why are you talking to us?
Linapin ko lang din to para at least maging aware lang din tayo sa lahat sa mga ganitong sitwasyon na huwag tayong basta-basta maniwala.
Do you think Maria would talk to us?
Hindi.
No.
Mag-ingat kayo.
What's that?
Mag-ingat kayo.
Be careful?
Yes. Mag-ingat kayo. Pwede kayong patayin doon.
We don't know for sure if Maria's syndicate was behind Jake's extortion. The operation is powerful and elusive, with scammers hidden behind fake IDs. But we do know that the money Jake wired was traced to a bank in the region Maria calls home. So I'm setting my sights on the Queen of Sextortion. The last we heard, Maria was based in a little town called North Hills, which she'd converted into her own scamming empire. But before I go to North Hills, I want to understand what I'll be walking into.
The extent of her operation actually is well organized, well financed. Her former street managers are still active.
Peter, not his real name, is a government official who asked us not to disclose his location. He's witnessed the corruptive power of the sextortion industry firsthand. It took a long time to convince him to talk to us, but he finally decided it was worth the risk.
You don't want your face shown?
The far reach of the criminal syndicates can be very, how would you put it?
Dangerous.
Even the level of government, you can never really tell who's taking pay, who's taking cuts. And everyone is involved from the local level up to the mid-level government executives and then, I believe, high up.
Wow, that's a really strong accusation.
Corruption in the Philippines has spiked in recent years. Dirty money has made its way into politics, elections, and even the judicial system.
In terms of corruption level, I guess we're turning into Mexico and Colombia insofar as extortion is concerned. That's what I fear the most.
Wow, so this is as dangerous a time as any to go and look for her, I guess. What advice do you have for us?
Unnecessary attention would bring too much suspicion, so worst case scenario, they do something to the would-be interviewers.
To us? Yeah, starting to think that maybe this is not a great idea after all. We're in the thick of it now. We're gonna start getting people looking at us because, you know, this isn't a very touristy area. They definitely don't see people with cameras coming here.
Underneath the veneer of quiet village life, North Hills hides a checkered history of corruption. Maria Cabreras, the Queen of Sextortion, based her operation here. And we have reason to believe she's still in the game.
They invest in their security, invest heavily on firepower, rubbing elbows with big-wig politicians around our jurisdiction and other provinces as well. So her power and influence just goes far-reaching us.
Maria's social media accounts are filled with pictures of her hanging out with local politicians. She apparently owns a gym and a youth center, which we hear she's used as a hunting ground for new recruits.
It's here.
Our local producer suggests we keep the cameras in the car, as they would attract too much attention.
I'm a little anxious just because of all the warnings and people who told us we shouldn't come. But I'm hoping we'll find someone to talk to. Yeah, and I think this is it, guys. We're in the thick of it now. Hi, can I ask you a question? Yes. Okay, Fred, maybe put the camera down. Hi.
Hi. What is the name you're looking for?
Maria Cabrera?
Maria Cabrera. You just follow me in the back.
Okay. Okay, you can put the cameras back up. What is this, like the mayorship? Oh, it's like the city hall. Okay.
Can you come with me?
Yeah, so this is like the city hall?
Small city hall.
Small
Barangay
city hall. Okay, and they can help me maybe?
Maybe.
Okay.
Because they know the records here.
They have the
records
records.
of all the
Okay.
residents here.
Let's see what happens. Thank you. Hi, Mariana. My name is Mariana.
Inside the city hall, I meet two women.
We're looking for somebody that I think lives in this region. Her name is Maria Cabrera. Maria Cecilia Cabrera. She doesn't live here anymore.
The women tell me that Maria no longer lives in North Hills, but her sister does.
The sister lives here. You know where the sister lives?
After a bit of back and forth, they agreed to help us track her sister down.
Okay, the sister of Cabrera. Okay, great. And if you can accompany me, that would be great.
Just as it seemed like we were about to catch a big break, one of the women decides to make a phone call, and everything changes.
Okay. I think Dan, who is our local producer, was just talking to them. Yes.
I think the local police here are trying to know what our purpose is.
Oh, they want to figure out what we're doing here?
Yes.
Local police is coming?
Local police, because people here are alarmed.
They're alarmed?
Yes.
Be we worried?
Yes, I think they're going to stop us from filming.
Oh, they're not going to allow us to film
Yes.
anymore. So you don't think we can go and talk to the sister?
I have to, because we have to wait for them.
So we
they
can't-
can kick us out.
Or they can kick us out. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so it says the people here are alarmed. They've seen the cameras, they've seen our car with a bunch of foreigners driving around, and they're coming to ask us questions. He thinks they're going to shut down our filming immediately, and they're going to ask us to leave town. What's happening, Dan? What's happening?
Hey, she's for the brown guy.
Hi, how are you? Mariana.
Where's your permit to shoot this?
Okay, so who is this lady? Sorry.
Volunteer tunnel.
Volunteer security.
Volunteer security.
Yes.
We just want to see if we can find Maria Cabrera's or her sister.
So she can't do anything because the leader is told her.
Oh, the leader called you and said that we have to leave?
Yes.
Can somebody show us where Maria Cabrera's sister lives?
Kahit wala doon.
Without cameras, nothing.
Hindi pwede.
No.
No.
Hindi kasi baka hanapan ako ng ako eh.
She won't do that.
Why?
She's afraid.
Dito, main tigbi para mabigyan.
You don't want to show us where
She's asking to leave.
to leave. Okay, so they're... Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Our presence here is clearly raising alarms, and our local producer is getting nervous.
Yeah, okay.
Guys, I think we need to go.
We need to go?
Yes.
What happened?
It's not safe here.
They're telling you that we have to leave right now.
We need to leave.
Okay. Do you want to get back in the car? Nobody wants us here, is essentially. Yeah, the idea is nobody wants us here.
As a journalist, the worst feeling is being forced to turn away. I've become so invested in this story, and I feel like I owe it to Cindy, to Jake's mother, to uncover as much as I can about the sextortion industry. But these scammers seem to be operating with impunity.
Hello.
So I'm surprised when my local producer tells me about a person who's actually being held in a jail nearby for crimes related to sextortion.
Hello.
And he's willing to talk to us. This jail houses all types of criminals and is massively overcrowded. I'm introduced to a young man we'll call Diego, who shares a cell with over a dozen other inmates.
How old are you?
I'm 25 years old.
I'm struck by the fact that Diego is only a few years older than Jake was when he took his own life.
So was it men you
I
scammed?
think women.
Women?
Yes.
Oh, that's the first time we heard that.
Diego was arrested for sextorting Filipino women on dating apps for small amounts of money. But now, he admits to crimes he's never been charged for.
My friend and I is scamming other people in other country.
Like which countries?
Yes, Canada, Australia.
Diego says he was never recruited to work for Maria Cabrera's. But at some point, he says he upped his game, adopting her syndicate's methods.
We spent time in the United States with families who lost their sons because they committed suicide because of sextortion.
Really?
You never heard this? No one never said, I'm going to kill myself if you continue asking me for money? Blackmailing me?
Yes.
Did they kill
Yes.
themselves? They died?
Yes.
How did you find out he killed himself?
Because camera of his laptop was on.
Oh, that's horrible. And you saw it happen?
Yes.
What did you say? Didn't you ask him to stop?
We chatted him, but she set up a rope, then he committed suicide.
That is horrible. How much money were you trying to get from
Only
him?
$1,000.
$1,000.
Yes, but I think value of money is not the reason why he killed himself.
So why do you think he committed suicide?
Their dignity. Because of his videos that I'm taken to him. I think he's scared, very scared. Because of that time he's crying and saying, please stop, please stop.
So if he was begging you to stop, why didn't you stop?
Because he didn't send money. Sinabi po namin yun edi gawin mo. Wala kaming pakialam.
No, you did not. So you said, just do it, I don't care?
Yes.
Why?
Others saying that same word.
So you thought he was lying, just bluffing, because others had said the
Yes.
same thing. But nobody had actually done it.
Yes.
Nobody had actually, are you sure nobody else did it?
We don't know.
We spent time with mothers of kids who committed suicide and seeing their pain and seeing them cry. Sorry, I'm gonna get emotional, but it's very, very hard to know that this is happening. And to now be with you here and seeing somebody who in many ways was responsible for somebody's death, right? Do you know that he committed suicide because of what you did to him?
I think I'm the responsible person in this scenario din. Nag-iisip po ako. Nalulungkot sa pangyayari na yun.
Hearing Diego admit to driving a person to suicide makes it hard to believe that this crime is not the reason he's in jail. Transnational scams are hard to prosecute, and Filipino authorities seem more concerned with crimes committed against locals than foreigners. I don't know whether Maria Cabrera still lives in North Hills, but her legacy is very much alive in the corruptive power of her syndicate and the ruthless playbook she created. Combating sextortion requires updated legislation, significant resources, and collaboration between law enforcement agencies around the world. But these things rarely happen, so these crimes continue, as does the pain they cause.
It sounded like a bowling ball coming down from a top shelf. I ran in there and yelled his name. He didn't answer, so I immediately just shouldered the door in, yelling to call 911 to my wife. But as I put my hand on his artery, I could just feel, it felt like a hose pipe. Blood was leaving very, very quickly. And I just sat there holding him until I couldn't feel the blood coming out anymore.
On July 27, 2022, Brandon Guffey's 17-year-old son, Gavin, ended his life after falling victim to sextortion by someone pretending to be a college girl from a few towns over.
After everything happened with Gavin, I was in such a dark place. I wanted to resign from the house. My wife's like, absolutely not. You're one of the few people that can make a change.
Guffey is a delegate in the South Carolina House of Representatives.
Today, we will be debating Gavin's bill on the floor.
And he has a plan to bring awareness and justice to victims of sextortion.
I lost the battle for Gavin, but if I can save these other teens, then that's what's most important.
No question. Mr. Guffey is next to speak on the bill. Mr. Guffey is recognized.
Okay.
Request debate.
Will I be able to speak on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Thank you.
You talk to people, do they even know what sextortion is?
It's still not out there enough, and it doesn't really make the news, and no one's truly explaining how dangerous it is. And as a parent, you hear something like that, and you think that, well, that won't happen to me. You know, my kid's smarter than that, but yet I still get messages every single day from somebody that's being extorted asking for advice.
Every single day?
Every single day.
In response to his son's death, Representative Brandon Guffey is now trying to put the dangers of sextortion on the agenda with a bill proposal that would increase the maximum sentence for a perpetrator in South Carolina to 20 years. He named it Gavin's Law, after his son.
The primary purpose of it is to raise awareness because most of the perpetrators are not coming out of the state of South Carolina. Mm-hmm. So it's really to open up the conversation with parents and teens alike and bring that awareness for them to have that hard conversation.
Even though the bill is limited to South Carolina, Representative Guffey hopes it will inspire a wave of similar bills across the country, eventually making it federal law.
I have one on my boyfriend.
But we're gonna put it on your shirt.
It's the day his bill is up for a vote, and his family joins him on the floor of the State House.
No question. Mr. Guffey is next to speak on the bill. Mr. Guffey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hadn't even said a word, and I'm tearing up. Most of my fellow House members are aware of the importance of this bill to me. 9 months ago tomorrow, I lost my 17-year-old son to suicide. And it was due to extorting. This is not just a problem in South Carolina. This is not just a problem in the United States. This is a problem globally. Our laws do not move fast enough to keep up to punish those that are responsible. I would like to read the names of the kids that just since my son have taken their life as well, because we're not getting the message out enough. You've got Carter Bresmith, forever 16, from Minnesota. You got Braden Marcus, forever 15, from Ohio. Waylon Schaefer from Montana, forever 16. James Woods, forever 17 in Ohio. And Walker Montgomery, forever 16 out of Starksville, Mississippi. And Landon Edward Todd Wegel from Wisconsin, forever 17. And my son, Gavin Timothy Guffey, who's forever 17. So I urge you guys to pass it, and I thank you for all of your support.
Vote of 113-0. House Bill 3583 as amended received second reading. Congratulations.
Gavin's law was passed unanimously and signed into law in August of 2023.
He's looking down, you know.
Yeah, I'm proud of him.
He's looking down.
A small but important step in the fight against this predatory new crime.
Thank you.
But we still have a long way to go. I've seen the roots of this black market. I know how it flourishes in the dark legacies of sex tourism and discrimination. Crime bosses see a workforce in the impoverished and marginalized, a revenue stream in the desperation of youth. There are no easy answers, no quick fixes. But if my experience as a journalist and a mother has taught me anything, it's that our best defense is awareness and communication.
My life has been devastated losing my son. My son's sorry. But maybe Jake's story can make him realize it's just a picture. Talk to your kids. There's so many people that have been affected from this.